McAfee, Director of Investigations at Homeland Security, JSO. I'm going to cover some facts about an officer-involved shooting that we worked last evening. I'll start with a recap of those facts. Around 6:20 yesterday evening, I had two narcotics detectives who had been working the day undercover capacity. We're at the intersection of 4 Acre and Wilson Boulevard on Jacksonville's west side. They're stopped at a traffic light and they're facing north on Wilson Boulevard. As they're sitting there at the traffic light waiting for it to change, they notice through the intersection there's a male on the sidewalk yelling and screaming at a party or another group across the street. They're watching what's going on, seeing what's happening, and wait for the lights to change. As they make it through the traffic light, they then notice that the male who's on the right-hand side of the road yelling and screaming actually had a gun in his hand. So they pull over to the side of the road and make a decision to call patrol officers to the area. As they pull over onto the curb of the road, they then realize from looking that he's not only holding the gun, he's now escalated to yelling and screaming, waving the gun around in the air. They make a split-second decision, feeling like it's imminent that a shooting is about to occur. So to protect the group that's across the street, they get out to confront the male holding the gun, waving the gun. As they approach him, he looks at the two detectives, takes the gun and conceals it behind his back. They close the distance and make it to him. At that point in time, the subject, as they go to detain him, he takes the gun and reaches for the gun in his waistband where he has now concealed it. Last night I put some information out that he actually pointed the gun at those detectives. From talking to our detective last night, some more witness information that we had at the scene, it turns that he didn't actually point the gun at him, but reached for the gun in his waistband. This obviously caused them great concern, feeling like not only had a guy who was about to use this gun in a shooting, well, their lives are now threatened by the fact he's reaching for it. Both of those detectives pulled their issued firearms and shot 4 times apiece at the subject. That subject was struck at least 3 times. He was struck in the abdomen, in the arm, and in the leg. He was taken by fire rescue to Shands for UF Health. He was taken to surgery last night. Surgery was completed. Now he's in stable but serious condition. I mentioned last night these are 2 narcotics detectives. I typically will release the identity of the officers involved in shootings. However, both of these detectives are still actively working narcotics issues, and to release their identity certainly would compromise their future work. They have been placed on administrative leave, however, until this matter is resolved. The first detective is a 54-year-old black male. He's an 8-year JSO veteran. The second detective is a 36-year-old black male, and he's a 5-year JSO veteran. The suspect from last night is 20-year-old Christopher Green. He has been arrested as an adult in Miami for a battery charge, and here in Jacksonville he's Baker Acted as an 18-year-old. That Baker Act didn't involve a firearm. No charges were filed against him for having that firearm in the Baker Act, but that copy of that will be released through the PIO to y'all. Last night I also mentioned that this subject in this had some connection to a shooting earlier in the week. I said yesterday that it was Monday, but it actually turns out it was Sunday night at around 5 o'clock in the evening at the Quick Way food store on 8,000 Hurlong Road. Green, the subject from last night, and 2 of his acquaintances were at the store. They're in the parking lot, and Green is approached by an unknown suspect who comes up to him, tells him that he wants to fight. Green tells him, hey, I'm not interested in fighting you, goes back and gets in the car. The car is driven by one of his acquaintances. As he's getting back into the car, the suspect who approached him comes over, opens his door, and punches him in the face. As he's getting punched in the face, Green happens to notice that the subject who punched him has got a gun in his waistband. Green makes a decision to reach for that gun and take that gun from the man who just punched him in the face. At about that same time as this is all happening in the store parking lot, the other passenger door opens. Another male opens the door and tells him he's going to shoot Green. So Green and his 2 buddies decide that the best thing to do is leave the area. They didn't call 911 then, did not summon police. They took Green to his house. Green did not call police from his house. Green got his car and decided to go pick up another one of the acquaintances and go play basketball. So didn't call police there. Go to Normandy Park on Lindsay Road on the west side. Pull up into the parking lot there, and there is a green or gold SUV parked next to him. Well, I didn't mention that when the suspects left the store on Hurlong, the subject thought that maybe he had Green and thought that they got into a gold-colored car. Well, what are the odds? The car he pulls next to in the parking lot at the basketball court is a gold Saturn. A gold Saturn obviously driven by the same person who he had an altercation with. That subject starts crossing the road, firing at him. Green, obviously in fear now that he's being shot at, goes back to his car and takes the gun that he took from the subject, who punched him in the face, and begins to fire at him. So there's now a gun battle going on in a basketball court area. She's shooting at the subject who punched him in the face. The subject who punched him in the face is shooting at him. Green then is able to get back in his car and leave. Green doesn't call police then. Some 40 minutes later, he calls police from a gas station. He tells police about what had happened and tells the police that he discarded the gun out of the window as he drove to call police. We went back and looked and obviously couldn't find the gun. The report was written, and detectives from our Violent Crimes Task Force were looking into that as a normal follow-up as to some of the cases they investigate. Turns out that last night the gun that the subject had on him was a 9mm. Well, the shell casings we recovered from the basketball court were 40 caliber and a 9mm. Detectives will look to make sure that these were the same 9mm shell casings, as we kind of believe it is. The odds of that just happening as it occurred were suspicious to the officer who wrote the original report. They still sound suspicious to me today as I relay those facts to you and the public. I said both of these detectives have been placed on administrative leave as per our policy, and I can answer some questions if anybody has them.
Jim Shaw from the Times-Union. So let's go back to the what happened at the intersection. And if you could take us through the scenario when they go through the red light and they decide to pull over and make the decision to get out before backup arrives, where did they go? What did they do? Did they take any cover? And how far were they from the suspect at that point?
A very short distance. Try to walk through as you asked those.
Sure.
As they came through the light, they obviously saw what they had seen him raising and waving his hands around. He now had a gun in his hand. Now, whether they could have seen that from the other side of the intersection, that remains to be seen. So they pull over. Again, at that point in time, seeing the confrontation that's going on between Green and the people across the street, it led them, rightfully to think that maybe something was going to happen, especially with the fact that now a gun's involved. So they were going to make the decision to call patrol units around. It was the point where they pulled over, looked behind them, and they saw that he was now waving that gun around. So Green had escalated that situation to the point of just holding the firearm. Now he's waving the firearm around. So he's obviously in an agitated state. Now he's got this gun in an argument. Yeah, I guess it's reasonable to believe that the next thing that may happen is that gun to be used. Those detectives making that split-second decision to involve themselves did so.
Did they take cover?
No, they did not take cover. They went to confront the subject who was waving the gun around.
Isn't there training or is it policy that they should not place themselves in harm's way if at all possible?
Well, in all things possible, yes. However, there are times in what we do as police officers that's not an option. If I was standing here today and giving information about a shooting that occurred on Wilson Boulevard where a subject shot two people across the street from him and we had an undercover detective drive by who took cover, I think the public would rightfully ask, if you had a police officer there, why didn't they act? Well, we did have a police officer there, had two of them there.
But they put themselves in harm's way, right?
That's what we did.
Did they identify themselves at any point? Did they have anything on that showed that they were police? Did they identify themselves to the suspect?
As it stands now, I don't know the answers to your questions, and I'll explain kind of why I don't. When these investigations occur into officer-involved shootings, they are criminal investigations. These two detectives involved yesterday have the same Fifth Amendment rights that you have, that I have, against self-incrimination. I can't compel them, based on a 1967 Supreme Court ruling, to answer my questions. If I do compel them to answer my questions, I then have practically given them immunity towards any criminal prosecution, because I've now caused them to answer my questions from an administrative side. That's why we do a criminal investigation first. At the conclusion of a criminal investigation, we then conduct an administrative investigation.
But how did you get the details then that they thought he was reaching for his gun in his back of his waistband if they didn't talk to you?
We have witnesses at the scene.
So you do have witnesses?
Yes.
Okay. What was their backdrop?
What was their
The
backdrop?
detectives, what was in the area when they decided to use lethal force against the suspect because they believed that he was a threat to them and others? What was the backdrop? They fired 8 shots. What was around them?
The suspect first was their backdrop.
Mhm.
The ground surrounding the suspect was their backdrop. And some of the wooded area that's there on the south side of Wilson Boulevard.
So were there any cars or any homes behind the suspect where they were shooting?
I'd have to look at a map. I know that we did have one passerby vehicle struck. I mentioned that last night. That was at the intersection of Wilson and 4 Acre. That was it. It was actually on 4 Acre. And that was struck in the back quarter panel of the car.
And is that all factored into when you guys ultimately make your decision as to whether policy was violated or not, whether they should have?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. From an administrative standpoint, there are tough questions asked, and in this particular shooting, there may be some tough questions for these 2 detectives to answer. I'm not gonna do that now, but again, those are questions that we have from an agency standpoint. Those are questions that a criminal investigator has as they look into this. And again, there are 2 criminal investigations done, one by the state attorney's office, independent of the criminal investigation done by JSO. Those are questions that I would like to have answered. The questions that you ask about their identification, those sort of things. But again, the sanctity of that investigation and my immediacy to know the answers to those questions could compromise that investigation. And I will not make a rush to judgment. I will not have my detectives make a rush to judgment and jeopardize that in this case or any of these cases. The criminal investigation that we do into these matters is no rubber stamp. It's no blanket approval that's given. Each case is looked at in its own merit, and the facts that surround each one of these cases is looked into at great depth.
I don't understand. How do you convince the public it's not a rubber stamp if you're investigating yourself? Your own people on the RTR board are investigating an officer in the same agency. How do you convince the public that it's not a rubber stamp?
In the same manner that we investigate and hold our officers responsible for any wrongdoing that they do. We terminate people quite often for their wrongdoing. The sheriff, in his 12 years since he's been in office, has terminated several police officers who have been found justifiable by the state and under the law in their use of deadly force. He's terminated them based on that. That's how the public trust is gathered. We are more than competent to investigate these shootings. As I mentioned, there are dual investigations that go on, so it's not just us looking at ourselves. This is, again, that's how this public trust is built with that, is the decision and the history over the years of our willingness to hold officers accountable for their use of the force. The Bay Meadows Road shooting involved 2 that were fired shortly after Sheriff Rutherford took over. Shooting on Dix Ellis Trail ended in a termination. We had Officer Ryan Frazier on the west side. He was terminated for his shooting. It's nothing we're afraid to do. It's nothing we hide behind. But those are done in due time. And I would say as a note to the public that we're more than competent to investigate ourselves.
Were these guys off duty or on duty?
No, these are on duty.
So what were they doing out there? Were they working on some other, were they just
Yeah,
driving?
they had been working narcotics all afternoon.
Haley, so
This
this passerby,
WOKV News, when the suspect was reaching, can you say he was actually reaching for the gun or the waistband? Like,
He was reaching for the gun.
was his hand on the gun when they fired the shots?
I don't.
Okay.
Did the witnesses tell you he was reaching for the gun?
Yes.
That's what the witnesses
Yes.
told you?
Samantha Manning with Action News. This passerby vehicle that was hit, so this was an unrelated individual that was driving?
Completely unrelated. They were the first person stopped at the red light at 4 Acre and Wilson.
And it was
Stopped at
just the
traffic
vehicle,
light.
not the person? that
The
was-
person was not struck, the vehicle was struck in the bottom quarter panel.
Haley Winslow, Channel 4. That car that was hit, was that with a bullet from the suspect's gun or from the narcotics
It
officers?
appears that both narcotics officers shot only, that the subject was not able to discharge any rounds, so
Okay.
it would stand to reason that it would
Yeah.
have been from one of the detective's guns.
Where was the gun found, the suspect's gun?
In his waistband.
Oh, it was still
Yeah,
in his
it was still in his
waistband?
waistband.
Lisa Robbins with First Coast News. What about the other two men that were, the suspect was arguing with?
I mentioned this last night, we'd certainly like to have them. Those are two outstanding witnesses to what occurred here. By the time that the first officers arrived and the detectives were able to secure the scene, they had gone.
What about, this happened around 6:20, media was briefed closer to 10 o'clock. We saw the helicopters out apparently searching for these two guys, is that correct?
No, that's just an assumption. The helicopter was used with the crime scene detectives, to take aerial photographs of our shooting scene to use during the criminal investigation and at the response to resistance board. So they were not utilized in searching for any subjects.
Is there a reason the neighborhood wasn't alerted to the fact that these two guys, who could potentially be armed, maybe not, but they were at least involved in this situation? The neighborhood wasn't.
They could have been armed, they couldn't have been armed. We had no true information that they were armed. We did know that one person was armed. We had that one person. Again, it wasn't anything that rose to the level of a notification to the neighbors. We did do a neighborhood canvass to try to find witnesses, knocked on the doors in those houses surrounding the area. And again, today, there's somebody who has information on this, witnessed it, has video of the incident. I certainly would love to talk to them, and hopefully they would come forward to us.
In a situation like this, where the officers are saying this person had, went to grab his gun, wouldn't body cameras be helpful in illustrating what exactly happened? Is JSO going to consider using those in the future because of situations like this?
I addressed the body camera issue last week during the briefing that I held for the other officer involved shooting. The sheriff's position is fairly clear on that. It's becoming a political issue now. Like I said, the sheriff has true feelings about this and the privacy issues that these body cameras would raise. He's addressed that, and I think he's addressed it adequately.
Tom, the distance when the detectives shot the suspect, do you know about how far apart they were?
Pretty close. I mean,
What is
to
that?
a couple feet at least.
A few feet.
As he's reaching for that gun, part of the training that we want to do is gain some distance with that. And this was, as the hands are going on to detain him, he's reaching for the gun, they push off. So it's very close.
Oh, so they actually went to try to detain
Yes,
him
yes.
physically?
Yes, they went to detain him.
Did they have tasers with them, or they're undercover
No.
guys, so they didn't? And do you know if either of these detectives have been involved in shooting previously?
Neither one.
This guy, obviously, I mean, with the other incident on Sunday, can you just talk about the importance of detaining a suspect like this that clearly has some issues?
I mentioned his Baker Act and the Baker Act that he had from a couple years ago, involved in a firearm. You'll get some information on that. As the detectives drove by, it was clear that something was happening, and he was not very settled in his demeanor. His emotions were high. That's one thing to drive by and see that go on. When you drive by and see that go on, and now his gun is involved in that, the duty to act on those detectives' part is raised. And then when it goes from just that to now he's waving the gun and the gun's going around in the middle of an argument, it's a fair assessment to make by myself or anybody in my profession that the next thing that may come along is that gun to be used. So,
Tom Madison, you said last night this was the fourth shooting. Has the shooting on West 30th been resolved? Were the bullets that hit the suspect in that case? Remember that, Brent? Was that did the police shoot?
that was the bullets involved in the case there that struck that subject were JSO bullets.
Any update on the suspect's condition?
We checked this morning, he is still in stable condition.
Do you know if there's any footage from witnesses or stores or anything that you have your hands on right now?
No, there is not. It's a normal matter, of course, and we do the neighborhood campuses, that we will look for houses, businesses that may have video cameras. There were none in this case, but as I mentioned before, if somebody has video of this, a bystander or somebody driving by may have seen this, taped it on their cell phone, we want to see it. I want to know every fact I can know about this during the investigation.
About how many witnesses were around when this incident happened?
We had at least 4.
Okay, and so I just want to be clear, when we were addressed yesterday around 10 o'clock for that years, detectives had not talked to witnesses at that point?
They had talked to some of the witnesses, but not all of the witnesses.
So after more witnesses were spoken to, then it was determined that the suspect did not point at the detectives, that he was just reaching for guns?
Yes.
Robert Jackson, Action News. Are you concerned that they only hit him 3 times out of 8, being that close?
I'm concerned that they only have 3 times in the beat.
And none of them were lethal.
I'm concerned that they had to use deadly force at all in this case. I've mentioned this at all these. All we want from subjects that we encounter is for them to comply with our orders. So I don't know where my concern would be about, our part of an administrative hearing that we hold, the Response to Resistance Board, is really an accountability for every shot that you fired. An accountability will be held for every shot that was fired, these 8 shots that were fired last night, when they pulled the trigger, where they went. Jim asked what the backdrop was. That's some of what's looked at with the Response to Resistance Board. It's an important aspect of it, but I think the thing that concerns me most is that we have another one within a week of somebody not complying with an officer's orders.
Is it, so they were on duty, they drive by, are they required to involve themselves in, in that dangerous situation, or could they have, I don't know, called 911 and had somebody else respond? I mean, obviously it probably could have taken a lot longer, but is there like a law that you have to stop and involve yourself in that kind of situation?
As a police officer, you just kind of sign on this job to do that, to act when it's time. Jim, you mentioned the fact, could they have taken cover, could they have done this? They could have driven by.
Yeah.
They could have seen this and driven by and not been concerned with the argument that they saw in front of them, or not been concerned enough to look a little bit farther and see that was a gun that he was holding, and just pick up the phone and like you said, call 911 or let a non-duty officer know. I raised the point a second ago. Had that occurred and a shooting occurred, I think the public would rightfully have the question to ask if, listen, you got 2, not 1, but 2 officers there. I mean, they're fully trained officers. They're armed. Well, why didn't they act? Why didn't they step in to prevent something from happening? They did. This is what occurred.
Given the publicity of what happened in South Carolina, it's on our front page today, it's been all over the news. What position? How does that impact, if you can address it, decisions that police are now making in terms of a mindset of using lethal force? I mean, does that give any hesitancy, and are there discussions, regarding those types of incidents?
The tendency of these media briefs to turn into an attempt to get me or the spokesman to become involved in a political statement, I can't involve myself with it. My concern is with what occurred here, what occurred with JSO. Our thoughts of that, it's just that it's not a winning argument to try to get pulled into a political discussion about
But it is an issue now, with the way that the public reacts to the use of force by police, right? I mean, so whenever JSO shoots, justified or not, it raises those issues. It brings out, political commentary from people. And I'm just, does that put, law enforcement in a position where, God forbid, in a situation where they needed to use force, that they hesitated?
It does go into political commentary. My interest is in the facts, and those best suited to discuss political commentary should do so.
You say this is another instance of a suspect not complying with officers' demands, but we're not clear if they identified them as officers, right?
Right.
Okay. So this may not be another
This
instance.
may not be.
Okay.
You said it was an 8 and a 5-year veterans of the GSO.
Yes, I did. 8 years.
And are they both African American?
They're both African American males. All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much. Thank you.